everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. New York City hardcore legend Harley Flanagan joins us. I'm sure most of you guys know this, but Harley was the founding member of the Cro-Mags, probably one of the most important hardcore bands to come out of New York City. Age of Quarrel was a genre-defining record, and to this day still resonates with fans of extreme music, hardcore, and punk rock. We talked about a lot of very deep things, so I hope you all enjoy. If you're listening to this show, then you most likely also enjoy the other podcasts brought to you by my brothers in the Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse. Kicking things off every other Monday, we've got Brandon Legion's Horror Wolf 666. Up next in the rotation, Jackie Smith brings us Into the Necrosphere, the hardest extreme music podcast in the land. On Wednesday, of course, we have Everything Went Black, as well as Iblis Manifestations. Thursday, we've got the Necromaniacs Horror Podcast, and it's day one of Soul Knox. Friday, we have Spitball Media. Saturday is a day off, but Sunday is day two of Soul Knox. If you enjoy the show, I appreciate your listening and sharing with your friends. But if you want to step things up, you can join the Everything Went Black Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get bonus material. For $5 a month, you get bonus material plus early access to the regular shows. And for $25 a month, you can become a sponsor. So thanks for joining us, Harley. Appreciate it. A couple years ago, back in 2016, the book came out, your biography came out. So now there's an epic documentary that's as this episode comes out, is the week of its debut on the East Coast. So I got a chance to watch the documentary, watched it actually twice. And I have to say, as a film, it's a very, very enjoyable piece of film. However, the story tells a harrowing tale that just a lot of it's a very deep, introspective view into your life. And I have to say, thank you for being so open about all this stuff.
Well, I speak the truth, man. You just, you can't tell part of the story. You don't tell just the things that are, pretty. You got to tell the whole story. And I think they did a good job with the film. Rex Miller, he's a great director. I didn't know him before, but I was introduced to him through a friend of mine in jiu-jitsu, and I saw the film that he did, Citizen Ash, about the tennis player Arthur Ashe.
Right.
And that was a great film. And I don't know much about tennis. I don't care much about tennis. And I knew who Arthur Ashe was, but I didn't really know much about him. And that film was so good that, it actually really pulled me in. And I walked away feeling like I not only learned something, but I enjoyed it. So I was like, you know what, this guy is really good at what he does. And I think he can make this film, and well, you saw it.
Yeah, no, it's powerful. It really is. And the thing about it, that the takeaway that I got from the film is it's not just like a rundown of events. There's like an overarching sort of dialogue that goes through the film. And there's a statement, I'm going to paraphrase it towards the end here, that you said. It's paraphrased, not exactly. I don't forgive myself, but I accept what I've done. The moment that you forgive yourself, you devalue the horror of what you've done. And I like that statement because it doesn't quite let yourself off the hook for doing the things you did. However, it kind of gives you a motivation to see past the things that you've done. You know what I mean?
Well, you can't live in the past, and you can't carry regret and guilt around on your shoulders to the point where it prevents you from being able to move forward. So and at the same time, I'm not, I don't buy into the whole, NAAA idea of, you know, you have to forgive yourself and this and that. And, I can't actually. There's a lot of things that I did that were just, in my opinion, are unforgivable. Now, can I undo them? No. But I can learn from it. And I know that if put in the same situation, I know I'll handle things differently. And, you know, uh, we don't know that much when we're kids. We're fumbling in the dark, especially if you don't have parental figures or adults that are giving you any, like, you know, roadmaps or guidelines. My mom, came from a generation, she was a hippie, and she had this idea that, our parent, that old hippie idea of our parents, taught us all you know, the wrong things, and blah 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 blah.
Right.
Kids can figure it out. This whole idea that we our nature is gonna, no. Actually, we need guides. We need role models. We need people in our lives that have experience to teach us things, or we're gonna make a lot of mistakes. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned a lot of bad things from a lot of bad people growing up on the Lower East Side. There was a lot of gangs and a lot of violence and a lot of drug dealers, and just a lot of really, and let's just own it too. The rock and roll world that I grew up in, it's also pretty seedy. You got a lot of real scumbag people in music, and especially back in the '70s and '80s. And when you're a kid, it's really easy to learn bad behavior. It's really easy to be, I don't want to say be victimized, but yeah, I mean, I would, as people will see in the film, a lot of people think I had this charmed life or whatever. They see pictures of me and Andy Warhol and Debbie Harry and The Clash and all these famous people, David Bowie, whatever. Yeah, I did meet a lot of really, really awesome people. I did see a lot of really awesome things, and I was part of a lot of great things. But the rock and roll world is a world of debauchery, excess, um, hypersexuality, and drug use. And these are all the things that I was exposed to before I had even, gotten anywhere near my teens. So by the time I was 15, I was shooting meth, smoking PCP. By the time I was, 11, I was getting blowjobs from 20-year-olds in bathrooms at clubs, and this is not normal. I have learned over years, this is not normal. I thought it was.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like, everyone has their own experience, like in life, and what people consider normal, changes, like everyone has their own perspective, and it's hard to, it's easy to judge someone and say, oh, well, that's fucked up, but if that was all you knew growing up, like that's all you knew. Either
Yeah.
if you're rich or you're poor or you're middle class, it's like that's what you know, and you accept that as being like the way life is. And it's only with like reflection on your life that you actually see that, oh, geez, maybe there was some trauma here, or there might have been some wrong turns I made, or misguidances and things like that. And that's when it's sort of like your duty to learn from that and improve and maybe course correct in your life.
That's, yeah, you'd like to hope and like to think that people would, but as we see, a lot of people don't. A lot of people just keep barreling ahead. And I've seen that even in my own circles. A lot of the people that I was friends with back in the day, I'm not really so close with anymore, just because I got to a place in my life where I realized that I was an asshole for most of my life. And I'm not saying that I was, it was intentional, or that I was like really a bad person in my heart and soul. But I did a lot of real asshole things, and you know, and I don't think you can really make any progress until you own that. So when I look at, a lot of my friends who are still not only acting the same, but are still like, you know, trying to justify their behavior then and now. And I'm just like, you know what? Until you kind of own that you are or were an asshole, you're not really gonna fix yourself. You're not gonna change, you know. So that being said, I I own it, and I keep trying to be a better person every day as I move forward in life. I've been on that mission for years now. Uh, it's all about self improvement. I want to be, you know, moving forward mentally, spiritually, physically, until the day I drop dead. Hopefully that will get me where I got to go.
Cormac's always been known as one of the, Krishna consciousness sort of bands, back in the 80s,
Mhm.
when that was like big in New York hardcore.
Well, we brought it into New York hardcore.
Right.
It wasn't big. It happened because of us.
Well, I think, yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of misrepresented that a
Yeah.
little bit, but yeah, essentially, that what you said.
I
Yeah,
mean, I introduced Ray Capo to Krishna consciousness, and
right.
obviously
That's in the
showed
film,
it
actually.
in
They
Krishna
talk about it in
consciousness.
the
Yeah,
film.
and
Yeah.
I love Ray, and it just goes to show that that really really put him on a path that changed his life for the better in every way. Now, me myself, I'm not a Hare Krishna. I'm not a. I'm actually. I don't follow any religions.
Yeah.
I know that I don't have all the answers, and I'm cool with that. I'm just trying to be a better human, man. And yeah.
But the question that I have though, and it's more like there's no answer. Obviously, there's no right answer to these things. But like, I'm not. I'm also atheist, but also I very fascinated by religions as philosophies and things like
Mhm.
that. So it's like, what about Krishna was like the sort of a positive influence, though? You know what I mean? Was it the idea of God, or was God an actual, you know, entity that was there a belief system around that?
I learned so much through Krishna consciousness that was beneficial to me. But let me just start off by saying, um, I don't I don't hold on to that for the simple reason it's a caste system,
Yeah,
and I can't roll with that. I think that everybody should have the hope or the ability to attain greatness or to strive for better. Just because you're born poor, because you're born a Sudra, you shouldn't. That's not your class. You can make a great life for yourself. The idea that women are lesser, is absurd to me. You
yeah,
know, so there's so many things about a philosophy and a religion that comes from anybody who believes in a caste system. I just actually cannot embrace wholeheartedly. I just can't. I mean, morally, I find that impossible. You know, and however, I learned a lot of great things through Krishna consciousness and the philosophy. I mean, it just, you know, forget about vegetarianism. Obviously, that helped me get on a path to what I believe was a healthier lifestyle. But it made me think deeper. It made me think about karma, like actually really think about it, not just like, okay, if you do something, something's gonna happen, but like really made me think about my actions and my behavior, and you know, one of my favorite quotes in Bhagavad Gita was on the battlefield of Kurukshetra when Krishna reveals himself to Arjuna as the creator, and of course Arjuna is completely overwhelmed because it's beyond his ability to comprehend something so ginormous. Like this is
right.
like when Krishna reveals his universal forms, and all of a sudden Arjuna is seeing like the actual face of God. His brain couldn't even. It was too much. Like hello, meltdown, boom. How do you wrap your head around this? And one of the things he said was, abandon all forms of religion and surrender unto me. And I took that to heart. And, I'm like, I'm not following any religions. I'm surrendering to a higher power, to whatever God is or whatever. And of course, as time went on, I realized I know nothing. I know nothing. So you know, I just believe in trying to be a better person. I think that the powers of the universe and or God or whatever whatever created us, that's it's not my problem. I
Yeah,
just
it's just interesting, like different entry points into like self-improvement. You know what I mean? That's the thing that fascinates me about like you're living a life in a certain way, and then the universe just puts this thing in front of you that you take it, you can take advantage of it or just, reject it. You know what I mean? And you
yeah
follow that, and then that leads you somewhere else. And then,
yeah
yeah, another thing that I perceive to be obviously a very important part of your life is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and being involved with the Renzo Gracie Academy.
absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely. Another game changer.
all right. So you've been training since like the mid '90s, right? That was when you got
Yeah,
involved.
90. I started in January, February. It was right before my birthday, which is March. So that's how I know of 96.
Yeah. All right. So back then, Jiu-Jitsu was not what it is today, where you can walk down the street and find anywhere to train. So how did I just started finding out about jujitsu in the mid '90s, and how did you find jujitsu? Especially with the lifestyle that you had and everything. It's like, how did you just happen upon Renzo
You know
Gracie?
what? I was seeking it.
Okay,
I was lucky enough to, well, I guess lucky, whatever. I saw UFC 1 and UFC 2. I actually got them on VHS at Blockbuster.
yeah, that was the only way you could get
I
it.
remember because I was going through a kick where I was watching lots of old boxing, lots of old fight stuff, and you know, and I remember seeing the cover of the box, and it was like, what the hell is this shit? I'm like, is this like some kind of fake wrestling bullshit, or what the fuck is it? But like, one dude had a gi on, and one dude was like covered in blood, and I was like, okay, this looks real.
Yeah,
Um, so I rented it. Sorry, my cat's fucking bugging out over here. Would you fuck off? So yeah, I that was my introduction to jujitsu, was seeing UFC 1 and then UFC 2. And I made up my mind then, and this was like 93. I was like, if I ever come across any of these Gracies, I gotta learn this stuff because I've been in more than a number of my fair share of fights in my life, and I've punched people, kicked people, head-butted people, driven elbows through people's faces, you name it. I've done it all. But I had never in my life seen an arm bar. I had
yeah,
never in my life seen a triangle choke. I was like, what is he doing? I'm like, dude, he just took this big dude who looked like he was kicking the crap out of him and just choked him out. I'm like, yo, I got to learn this stuff, man. This is fascinating. And at that point in life, I most of my fighting days were behind me, but I was still a fan of the art of you know combat and
sure.
self defense. That's the kind of thing you're into for life. So when I after I saw that, I started looking. I moved back to New York. I actually discovered UFC when I was in California. So I moved back to New York and I started just looking through all the magazines. I would go into, and look at like Black Belt magazine, Kung Fu magazine. I'm thumbing through the back, looking through the ads, trying to see because, this is like pre-internet and this and that. So,
Yes, yeah,
I'm like literally one of these Gracies has got to move to New York soon. They can't all live in California. So I'm like going and I'm like looking all the time. And one day I opened one up and it said Gracie Kukuk, and it was in Manhattan. And I went, and this is when Renzo had just first moved to New York. He was him and Craig Kukuk, this other black belt,
yeah,
American black belt. They had a school, and man, I went there, and the first time I walked in, I didn't know what the etiquette was. There was, I didn't know, am I supposed to go in and like bow to the Brazilian flag or whatever? Am I supposed to, well, I didn't really know. And I just walked in and I'm like looking around and Renzo, I didn't even know it was Renzo, walks up to me and says, "Hey, my friend, you come to train?" And he gave me a big hug. And I was like, wow, like this is really cool. Like this guy's, this is super friendly environment, blah blah blah. And he only had like there were no he was the only black belt that him and Craig were the only black belts there. He had one brown belt from Brazil and one purple belt. And this was like first generation. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember when me and Matt Serra were like blue belts at the same time. Me and John Danner was a blue belt. We were all, it was like that same moment. I was like literally watching all of the Pride FC fighters and all of the early MMA like guys coming up. It was incredible. It was intense. And it was really like a much tougher environment back then. Like you didn't have kids programs.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of women training. It was
Yeah.
everybody in there was either somebody who was training to become a pro fighter, or they were a bouncer, or they were just like somebody who liked fighting.
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
you had knuckleheads, and it was the kind of environment where like you walked in and like everybody stopped training and looked at the person who walked in. It was like wah, 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 wah.
Yeah. Oh
Like
yeah, totally, man. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, no one even knew about it back then. No
well,
one knew what
yeah,
it
you
was.
couldn't
That was the
take
thing.
pictures, you couldn't videotape because they didn't want the secrets getting out.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like that. And it was like you come in and it was like, who do you train with? Like, are you a spy type of,
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was definitely a little bit more thugged out. But the sport has evolved a lot, and you know, I mean, those days were gold. I'm just really lucky I was there. But
I mean, the thing though, is that, and this is the same story with a lot of people. You go in on day one and you think like, you go there because you want to learn how to hurt people, basically. I mean, that's what I got into martial arts for too.
yeah,
And it's like, but then the ancillary things that are way more beneficial than just learning how to like kick someone's in the leg or, choke them
bro,
out or whatever. You know what I
I,
mean?
I started because of the fighting, and I
Yeah.
stayed because of the love. Because Henzo is literally, I mean, I can say it without a second thought, I love that man. I respect that man. I look up to that man. He's made me a better person. There's not a lot of people I could say that about. He's taught me things about myself that I couldn't see. He's given me advice about life that was gold, beyond gold. Forget gold. Gold is nothing. He gave me advice that was like life changing, things that just, he gave me strength when I needed it. By showing me who I was. That's the thing about a great coach is like they can see your potential. They can point out the mistakes you're making. That's part of their gift. It's not just that they're good at what they do. They can see who the real you is and help bring it out of you. That's like, not just even a jujitsu coach, but a life coach, like somebody who has that eye. Enzo's got that eye. He's a really special human being. And you know, I went through some really hard times and he helped me through them, and I owe that man a lot. So that being said, I suggest anybody out there, everybody should train jujitsu. I think everybody should learn some sort of self defense. It's just it's a life skill that everybody should have. The same way you know how to like dress yourself, you should know how to defend yourself. And exercise, as far as I'm concerned, it's like brushing your teeth. It's something you're supposed to do. It's not something you choose to do. It's something you do.
Absolutely. I mean, but also even like mentally too, it's learning, continue to learn things throughout your entire life is
Yeah,
important,
man, it's critical.
or perfecting certain things is important for that mental exercise so that you don't lose your mind.
Absolutely, man. You need to keep absorbing and striving.
And not for nothing, just even the social aspect too of it. Because I remember during the pandemic, like, I mean, I trained Muay Thai, and, I trained Jiu-Jitsu and like, variety of different things. When the pandemic shut everything down, that isolation, and then when I the first day back on the mats, and you realize how much you miss people, and how much that element of it not being in your life, and the fact that you can connect with people that you might not even normally even run into, like
Definitely. I mean, I've met some really great people through jujitsu, and like you say, people you would never have met had it
yeah,
not been for meeting them on the mats. Um,
absolutely.
but I myself, the pandemic, truthfully, it was some of the best time of my life, man, because I really don't like people too much. And like I just got to stay home and hang out with my wife, who's like my favorite person to be around. So like it didn't matter to
That's
me.
awesome.
The one thing I learned during the pandemic was how to work out without a gym.
Dude, I hear you. Absolutely.
I actually all my routines that I do now, I developed during the pandemic, and I don't go to the gym. I don't need weights. I don't, so I got the best out of it that I could. And, you know, but definitely missed jujitsu. And yeah, man, I wish I could go train today, but I'm leaving Monday. I only got a couple of days to pack and everything else. So
Yeah. So one of the things that always grabbed me too was going back to the Chromax, and it hit me while I was watching the documentary when oh, by the way, really cool footage with the stimulators. I really enjoyed that part
yeah, I
too.
was happy that we found that stuff.
Yeah, that's a real treat, and I think anyone who watches this documentary is going to appreciate that. So now you're in the stimulators. It's a punk band, a very good like punk band, Max's Kansas City style type of thing, right? You go to Ireland, you learn about the skinhead culture over there. Come back to the States. The music that you made that became the Cro-Mags is way different. Okay. It's probably more of an internal dialogue, I'm assuming, right? But the sound, okay. Now, I was not originally, when I was a kid, I was a metalhead. All right. I got into punk rock because of like Black Flag, because to me, they sounded like, like Black Sabbath and Slayer and stuff like that. You know what I mean? The Cro-Mags, when someone played me the Cro-Mags for the first time, well, first I heard about the Cro-Mags. I was in high school, and they're like, "You should check this band out." They're not really what you listen to, but I think you would like them. So I'm like, okay. Headbangers Ball, like 1 o'clock in the morning, the We Gotta Know video hits, right? And that intro to this day is still one of the heaviest things I've ever heard. And then there's like guitar solos. There's like this like chunky like heavy metal riffs in it and stuff. And I was like how did those two things? Because I got to be honest, the Cro-Mags are probably the first band that I was aware of that sort of played that style, that did that style of hardcore. And then of course Agnostic Front, Cause for Alarm. That record is a very thrash crossover record. Carnivore, like bands like that. Um, So what was the sort of thought processes when you were developing this sound, And I always want to ask you that because I hear so many different things in that first
Yeah,
record.
no, I totally hear you. It's I can tell you pretty easily. I mean, obviously, when I was in the stimulators and the Bad Brains came to town, that was just a game changer for me. Like
Yeah,
all of a sudden, music had taken a new form, and then seeing bands like Minor Threat and I remember the first time the Circle Jerks came to New York and just like, seeing Black Flag and all those bands in real time as they were happening and as they were
sure.
first coming around. That was really the impetus for me to create my own sound and leave the stimulators and do something that was more me, something that felt like me, that something that expressed my feelings and channeled my energy and so the main ingredients, and I'm going to use that word, ingredients, the things that I used to kind of come up with my sound. Obviously, the Bad Brains were huge. The drums, the way Earl Hudson played the drums was like so unique, so game changing. So that type of sizzle on the hi hat, that type of swing, because it was it wasn't stiff. There was swing to it. That was what was special about the Bad Brains. They actually had swing. They had groove. It wasn't just like da, 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 da. It was like like it had shuffle groove. So that was critical. And then the other bands that were like huge for me at that point, like the album Hear Nothing, See Nothing, Say Nothing by Discharge was like, to me, that record sounded like, if you could have written a soundtrack for like World War, that was what it would sound like. Your living room getting like the wall, a tank coming through your living room and like a dive bomber coming, over your building. That's what Discharge sounded like. I was like, and also I had gotten really into Black Sabbath, who I didn't discover until '82. I was a little late on them because I was not a metalhead.
Quick side on the Black Sabbath thing. Was it the Dio version of Sabbath or the Ozzy version?
No, it was the Ozzy version. I actually took a long time to be able to give a fuck about Dio.
Okay.
The first Sabbath album I heard was Master of Reality.
Right. Yeah.
And and so I did a deep dive on Sabbath after that. And so, okay, Bad Brains, Discharge, Sabbath, Geezer became a big part of my bass playing approach. Like just like the runs, I actually remember sitting there and copying some of his runs and just to learn how to play. I learned how to play from records, from playing along to other people's stuff. And then I saw Motorhead's first show in New York. There was like less than 200 people there. It was the Ace of Spades tour. And that was just like game changing. To me, Motorhead was like, the way I described them was biker rock. That's what I thought of them. Yeah. I was like, if Hell's Angels played rock and roll, this is what it would sound like, But so Motorhead, Discharge, Bad Brains, Black Sabbath, and then Venom, Black Metal came out.
Okay. Yeah, that was like 82, I think that record came out or something. Yeah, early 80s.
So basically all the records that inspired what I did came out between 80 and 82, more or less. And that's when I started writing my songs. And like the first few songs that I wrote that wound up in the Cro-Mags catalog were Everybody's Gonna Die, which is, there's definitely a Discharge-ish type of Motorhead-ish type of, but just done, like a teenager, like done like a skinhead from New York, So, basically I just took those sounds and I tried to, the initial goal was I wanted a skinhead band that sounded like Discharge. Obviously that changed, my horizons broadened and basically I just, that was how I got the sound. And the lyrics were really just I don't want to say like my journal, but they were basically just what was happening in my life day to day. Like, living in burnt out buildings, living on the streets. It's the life of the Cro-Mags, survival of the streets, Never know what's coming up ahead. If the beast pulled the trigger, could wind up dead, The beast was obviously, what we used to call the cops back in the day,
Yeah, but you can use that as an allegory for a lot of things, though,
Exactly. And, the lyrics were real. They were about real life, about, I mean, I moved out of my parents, my mom's, when I was, 14 or 15. I was living in squats and I was basically shoplifting and doing whatever I had to survive, to eat. And that's what the lyrics were about, So you took, I took all the heaviest music that I think of and tried to make my own sound out of it. I was also listening to, believe it or not, a lot of stuff like, Return to Forever and Mahavishnu and all kinds of crazy shit that the Bad Brains had turned me on to. Like I wouldn't even have known about that shit if it wasn't for the Bad Brains. That's how I actually came up with the intro to We Gotta Know. It was, for me, that was basically just my interpretation of like fusion. I just like, because if you listen to a lot of jazz fusion from back then, a lot of times these parts that sound super complicated are actually really just big blanket chord progressions that have a lot of little stuff going on over it, like usually a lot of drum fills or little things happening on a guitar or a keyboard. But like that's why I came up with the gang, gang. And then I'm like, throw a bunch of drum fills over
Yeah.
it. And all of a sudden it sounds like something really massive. All of a sudden it sounds like a jazz fusion type of thing. And then it punches into something that was totally Bad Brains inspired. You know, the rest of that song was inspired by Eye Against Eye. And
See
I,
that,
and
yeah.
I and I wrote it with that intent because they had actually stopped playing the song for a few years, and I just missed hearing it. So I was like, fuck, I need to hear something that sounds like that. So I'm going to write something that sounds like it. And just and I obviously it's different, but that's what inspired it. So like I literally, it was like like jazz fusion for the intro meets Bad Brains for the rest of the riffs. And then, you throw John's, Cookie Monster vocals on top of it, and there you have it.
The thing about the Chromax, especially Age of Quarrel too, is like, you can take the lyrics literally, but there's also like I mean, I didn't grow up on the streets or, running from the cops or anything like that. So, but there's like it's relatable because a lot of it you can read like as an allegory, like when we talk about the
Agreed,
beast and everything,
agreed,
and
agreed.
and that's why to me that record like kind of stands the test of time in a lot of ways, where maybe some records sort of went by the wayside or sound dated. You know what I mean?
Oh, I hear you, man. I mean, that's one thing about not just, the music and the lyrics, but even the film, Wired for Chaos. It's like, you don't have to have had my life or my experiences necessarily to be able to relate to these stories or these lyrics because at the end of the day we all go through a good amount of shit in our lives. I think most of us come from families that had some kind of trauma or drama. At least half of us come from
Yeah.
broken families, and at least a good percentage of that number of kids wound up homeless or wound up on drugs or had problems in their life, whether it was violence, at home or violence in the streets or bullying or, sexual abuse or any of these things that happen. This is life. So I don't think, trauma, drama, suffering, or struggling is, not owned by any group or any class of people. I think it's something that everybody can relate to in some way. And I think that's why we resonated with so many people. I mean, and even just the kids who felt the need, you had a lot of kids in hardcore who were actually like rich kids and kids from families that had money who were kind of, I always used to feel like they were kind of like faking the punk, faking the funk, because I felt like it was, this is music for the streets. It's music for the struggle, for this. Rah, 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 rah. But the fact is, those people have their own problems and they need their own escape, and maybe they're trying to find something real because they feel like everything they've learned and seen is bullshit. Who can say or know why we're pulled to this thing? I feel like in a lot of ways my music spoke, and my lyrics and my movie speaks to a lot of, not to sound all deep and shit, but just a lot of people who were like broken early on in life and needed to find themselves through something that they could either go and rage out, or that they could identify with the anger or the angst, or like another group, a group of people who feel similarly. It's like, you know,
Yeah, I mean, well, like I was saying, I grew up in the suburbs, and I would, take the Metro North, going to the
mhm.
city, and all that sort of stuff. So, like on the flip side of what you were saying about kids from the suburbs coming down, and the similar trauma, but just in a different environment,
Yeah,
and being alienated and feeling alienated from the culture that you have in these
yeah,
like
that shit's
towns.
real, man.
And you hear about something that might benefit you spiritually, like intellectually, or
Or
something to
just
make you
give you
feel
a
different.
release, just
Yeah,
give you a place to let the steam off that,
yeah.
that builds up from all the fucking jocks at your school fucking with you because you listen to music that they don't understand. You
Yeah,
know,
totally.
like people don't realize how difficult it was to be into stuff that was counterculture back in the day. Like if you were a punk rocker, man, you had a target on your back, you know, and it didn't matter if you lived in the suburbs or the cities, the inner city, you were a walking target. You know, people don't
100%.
realize that because now everybody's got fucking tattoos on their face and purple hair and fucking
Yeah.
piercings in their fucking nose and everything else. You know, I mean, even like hip hop people look like they're like punk-ish now. Everybody looks like a freak. Librarians have like tattoos on their neck, for Christ's sake, you know. And like back then, if you look like that, you were gonna probably get jumped, beat up, or at least have something thrown at you from down the block. You know, like so whether you were in the suburbs or the inner cities, you felt a certain alienation from your surroundings. And if you were able to find this little tribe of people who enjoyed the same things and had similar experiences, all of a sudden you didn't feel so alone.
Absolutely, you know,
You know,
and that's what makes all this relatable and sort of timeless in a lot of ways, you know. And the film itself, like you were saying, it's a story about, you know, a specific life, but also you can extrapolate that onto other people's experiences. And it's not like, to me, the feeling I got out of it was like I was reading like a Hubert Selby novel or something, or I was watching Last Exit to Brooklyn or something, you know, this like story that he wrote that was sort of about his life, but this is actually about someone's life, you know. And it has
yeah.
all there's segments of that, of your story, that could actually be made into films, I think. You know what I mean?
Actually, you know, it's funny you say that because when my wife, who was then not my wife, first started editing my book, she saw that it could and should be a film. And
Yeah,
she meant like a film, not a documentary.
right.
And that was never my intention. I mean, my intention was just to like write down my story before, like, you know, I got hit by a truck or something and some other asshole wrote it and lied, you know, like Harley was this, Harley was that, and he did this and he did that. Meanwhile, I'd be like rolling in my grave saying, that's not what the fuck happened, you know,
Yeah,
or somebody like, you know, my old guitarist will write and be like, he's an asshole. I wrote all the music. Fuck him. You know, it would be some dumb shit. So I started writing it down just because I like, you know, I got to get my story told. Actually, I started writing the book when I was really spinning out of control in the 90s. And I didn't think I was going to live too long. So I was like, I better write this down before I can't, you know.
right. Yeah,
And then fortunately, I got my life back together and eventually finished the book. And it was supposed to be, I was going to call it the longest suicide note ever written because I was pretty confident that I was going to drop dead before I was done with it. And I figured that would be the end of it. That would be the end of the book, you know. And but I lived, and I not only lived, I wound up doing pretty well. And so, yeah, she thought it should be a film. I remember her always, you know, joking about, you know, wonder who should play you, who should play, you know. And it was just, you know, like that type of
that's
shit, you
funny,
know?
man.
Yeah. And you know, and then when we did start having meetings about, you know, with different people about making it into, you know, making my story into a film, there were different ways they wanted to do it. They thought about doing like a mini series. You know, they thought about, you know, because there's so much content.
Yeah, there's a
And in
lot
fact,
there, definitely.
they actually had it edited in a 3-part mini series at first because there was so much footage, and then over time it wound up getting turned into a film. So we, you know, condensed, lost a little bit, trimmed, blah blah blah, and we got this movie now, which is going to have a, you know, some outtake stuff and stuff like that when it goes to DVD. Obviously,
Yeah,
it was a lot. I mean, they had over 200 hours worth of interviews alone. Never mind the all the archival footage and the photographs and everything else. I mean, they really, really did deep dive in this thing. I mean, they Christ. I mean, they got footage from the BBC of like a riot that happened at our show in Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1980. I was like, there's footage of this? You know, I was like, wow.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
You
it's
know,
definitely
I was
deep.
like, oh my God, this is on film. You know what I'm saying? They found
Yeah,
footage of some of the squats that I lived in. I'm like, where did you find this? You know?
Great interviews too. I mean, you got there was Henzo was in there, Matt Serra's in there, Michael Imperioli. You
Yeah,
know, there's like then if, what I consider like the go-to guys like Rollins, Keith Morris, Ian
yeah,
MacKay,
man.
like those guys.
Nothing
It's
but heavy hitters, dude.
yeah, Ice-T, Danzig, it's like
Yeah,
yeah,
Jocko Willink,
Jocko Willink is in there. Yep. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
man.
I remember hearing your episode on Jocko's podcast. That was a good episode for sure.
He's awesome, man. He's a really badass dude, and really, I'm lucky to have that dude in my corner.
One of the heaviest parts of the doc was the cassette that your father sent you too.
Yeah, that was nuts, man.
Yeah, that was
Amazing
like,
that actually was able to hold on to that thing for all those years because I mean, I got that back in the '80s, and obviously I've had some ups and downs and moved around a lot since then. So I'm just glad still had it.
yeah, stuff. There was something that showed up twice in the documentary, and I was both times. It was very haunting, to hear a voice from
Yeah,
the past like that. It was very
yeah,
effective.
especially admitting their failures in life and talking about yeah, it was rough. I mean, he acknowledged that he was.
Yeah. Just to lighten things up a little bit, I got one obvious question actually that I forgot to ask you when we were talking about the band. Okay, so you play drums in the Stimulators, right?
Yeah.
So why not play drums in the Chromax? Like, why bass? Like, what was it about
Well,
bass?
I actually was playing drums at first, and as I was in the process of putting the band together, I was auditioning and playing with different people. And at that point, I had gone through like two or three guitarists and a couple different singers before I met Paris. And then me and him started playing. I was still on the drums, and I was teaching him songs that I had written, and we were coming up with songs together. And I we tried a few different guys. In fact, one of them was Todd Youth, and I actually spent a lot of time and effort teaching him how to play and teaching him how to play my songs. And he acknowledged it for forever. He was like, Harley taught me how to play like this and da da da. And then he quit to join Warzone, and I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm not going to teach anybody else how to play. I'm just going to fucking and we didn't really know what to do as far as drummers. And Mackie was with this band Urban Blight and this other band called Frontline at the time. And I actually didn't even think he'd be interested because he was already pretty busy. But we asked him, and he was down. So that became the trio that started practicing. And then, like I said, I'd been through a few singers. At that point, we recruited my childhood best friend, Eric Casanova. Me and him wrote a lot of the lyrics for the first album. Like the majority of the lyrics that are more street oriented, like street justice,
Yeah.
survival street. Life of my own was I think one of the first songs that me and him wrote together lyrically. Still one of my favorite lyrics. Um, and then he wound up getting his girlfriend pregnant, and that was that. He was like 15. It was crazy. He tried to be a father. Tried to work. At 15. So you
Yeah.
already know. Okay, and that's when we auditioned a few other people, and we even auditioned Roger from Agnostic Front, and John wound up getting the gig. I think we even did a show with Roger. Yeah, I think we did a show, and I think we actually did one show with Roger playing bass and me on drums. Like we went
Wow.
through, we did it didn't just all come together right away.
Yeah.
It took a little
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. I mean, bass, because I always think of you as a bassist, and a vocalist too. I mean, I think, when you on Best Wishes, that's some of my favorite vocal performances
Oh,
of the
thank you.
band, actually.
Thank you.
I mean, I make no secret about that. That's for sure.
Honestly, we recorded that album, I did not even know if I would be able to sing and play the bass at the same time. I had never done it. I like some of the vocals, I guess. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never sang into a mic or never had the responsibility of being the lead vocalist. And I'd never, I mean, I sang on the demos when I was a kid, but this
Yeah.
was that, I was like little kid, man. I was like, whatever, 13, 14, whatever, however old I was. By the time we did Best Wishes, there was a lot more pressure on because we were already an established band. We had been touring. I was replacing a singer that was, had really left an impact. I mean, John was an energetic, powerful frontman. Let's just be honest. I mean, whatever he lacked as a singer, he made up for in spades by his, performance, just the energy level, Yeah. And I'm not shitting on his vocals neither, because I mean, let's face it, hardcore was more about, an energy and a attitude than it was about, vocal technique. You didn't have to sound like, everybody wasn't Glenn Danzig or HR. You didn't have to sound like, Dio. You didn't actually have to be able to hold a note. You just had to have attitude.
Yeah, delivery. Yeah.
So and that he did. I am a little bit, not to flatter myself here, but I'm a little bit more musical. I just grew up a musician. John wasn't a musician. He took the role of a front man and, would bark the lyrics out as the words would come, as the parts of the song would come up, he'd bark them out. I tried to sing a little bit more. I'm not saying I did a great job or anything. It's just, I'm a musician. I can't help it. Even when I try to just go completely, non-musical, it still doesn't work.
Well, that's awesome, man. I'm looking forward to. I'm going to try to catch one of these New York, showings.
Yeah, bro. I hope you do, man.
Yeah,
and
I'd love to see it on the big screen.
I hope you come down to the CBGB's festival too, man. We're gonna be playing with what's left of the Sex Pistols, the Damned, and everybody else.
Wait, when is the CBGB's festival?
I think it's. I could be wrong. I think it's in September or.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
I thought it was like this weekend.
No. This weekend I'm flying to Europe, man. I'm playing in Germany on like Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm leaving Monday.
Dude, the Damned are like one of my favorite bands, so I would love to go check them out and see you guys play.
A few shows with them, with the Misfits, over the last couple of years, and they killed it, man. I mean, the Misfits were great, but the Damned put on a hell of a show, and they played. When we played with them, they did almost the entire Machine Gun Etiquette album and a few other classics from the first record. But Machine Gun is one of my favorite records. So
classic record.
Yeah, to hear that played live and to hear it played so well, it's fucking awesome.
Well, thanks for joining us, Harley. Appreciate it. And safe travels, man. Safe travels.
Thanks, my brother. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Hell yeah, man. Next time we have a big event to promote, we'll get you back on.
Man, I look forward to it, and thank you for that.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye.